All right, that's terrific. Next up, we have our keynote speaker, Nick Andersen. And Nick is the acting director of CISA. I have personally interacted with CISA over the years, and is an outstanding organization. And one of the things that Nick and I have in common is he is a Marine Corps veteran. And so I think the presentation will be understandable even to other Marine Corps veterans. So that's a shot at the Marine Corps. So Nick has also benefited from some all-expense paid trips to Iraq. And he's got some great insights for us to talk about kind of the state of cyber defenses. I think a lot of what, at a nation-state level, some real emerging threats that this organization is dealing with actually today. And so hopefully he'll share, obviously, what he can on that front. But I think you're in for a real treat. Please put your hands together for Nick Andersen. Thank you.
Thanks, I appreciate it. Thanks, Mike, I appreciate that. And I will try to speak slowly for my fellow crayon eaters out there this morning. Thanks so much to Blue Ventures for having me. I really do appreciate it, and I appreciate the opportunity to be with all of you today, bringing together a community of founders, of investors, operators, and technologists matters more now than perhaps ever before. Now, a lot of people that are in this room are going to be building the technologies that are going to determine not just if the United States wins or loses the cyber competition over the next decade, it's going to determine whether or not our country wins over the next decade. This really is not an exaggeration, and I don't think I have to preach that in a significant way to this audience, but we're living through a fundamental shift overall in the threat environment. The cyber domain is no longer primarily associated with data theft and isolated ransomware attacks. We are now confronting adversaries, particularly nation-state sponsored adversaries, who are systemically preparing to hold our critical infrastructure at risk during a future crisis or conflict. In fact, just yesterday, CISA launched a new initiative called CI Fortify that's specifically focused on that effort to be able to talk about both isolation and recovery, recognizing that as we shift and CISA becomes less of an IT security agency and more of a nation's wartime prep agency, we have to be prepared for critical infrastructure owner-operators to potentially operate in isolation for upwards of 2 to 3 months, which is a hard pill to swallow when you think about the non-availability of critical telecommunications for 2 to 3 months. But when we start to think about the interconnected nature of our systems, whether they're water systems, whether it's our grid operations on the electricity side, whether it's our pipeline operators, we are no longer in a state of play where we can assume that we're going to have critical infrastructure persistently available during a time of crisis. The shifting sands that we've seen as the geopolitical conflicts of the day have played out understand that cyberspace operations are going to be an operational imperative choice for commanders, not just for our commanders on our side, but the enemy gets a vote here as well. It's going to continue to see a crisis evolution option that we see evolve. So as we start to focus on this more of a national security issue, as an economic security issue, and increasingly a geopolitical issue, that's really where CISA looks across federal government and critical infrastructure, and we identify those trends that are most deeply concerning and how we begin to target against them. In particular, when we look at Chinese state-based actors like Volt Typhoon and Salt Typhoon that we've been talking about for several years, they continue to pre-position not just to simply steal information. Not just starting out in the Marine Corps, but starting out in the intelligence community. I can take a don't hate the player, hate the game mindset when it comes to people pre-positioning to steal information for the purpose of advancing a nation-state's critical geopolitical objectives. But we see this pre-positioning happening within our critical infrastructure that Americans rely on every day, that businesses rely on every day. The potential psychological damage that could be done through impact to critical infrastructure as we begin to emerge in this space is significant. Not just to look up and see, this is really inconvenient, my power's out this morning, and maybe I've got an electric water heater, so maybe I can't have a hot shower this morning. But looking and questioning whether or not it's safe for our family to even be able to touch the water. To understand, is it going to have, a potentially, life-impacting event? Do we have electricity that's going to allow somebody to be able to get to a dialysis center? Are we going to have a blood bank that's continued to be operational? Not just, since we're sitting here in Capital One, not just, is my ATM unavailable, but are the globally systemically important banking infrastructure even available to be able to underride the large payment processing systems that we come to rely on just for moving the economy? When we start to think about, power, water, transportation, comms, healthcare, financial services, again, it's about that strategic positioning that we see our adversaries beginning to move forward with. It's about creating those options to disrupt, coerce, delay, or create panic during those periods of geopolitical tension. And while we see significant nation-state actors as pacing threats here, it's not the only threat within this environment. Ransomware groups are continuing to target hospitals and local governments. We've seen the work of Iranian threat actors as they continue to try to engage in disruptive cyber activity. It's largely been opportunistic in nature over the last couple of months. These are opportunities where we have to work hand in glove with the private sector, because again, it's not CISA operating the infrastructure that Americans rely on every single day. Is private corporations that are doing it, or municipal-owned utilities that are doing it. But we know that we have disruptors within this space as well. It couldn't be a cyber conference without us saying AI and pretending like it's not a magic wand conversation. But we know that AI is dramatically accelerating the speed and the velocity and the sophistication of cyber operations for both nation states and criminals. We know that we're going to continue to see that in the coming months. We know that it's only a matter of time before our adversaries have access to similar models. And the preparatory work that we can do now to buy down some of the significant technical debt and to make the types of architectural and technological changes that we need to make in order to be able to secure ourselves against this increased velocity and threat is going to be significant. We have to be able to build resilience at the speed required by the threat environment. And I think my message to you today would be very simple. The federal government can't do this alone. I do appreciate the positive plug for all the good that the federal government can do, especially in this environment, the type of access that we have to be a joint collaborative ecosystem of folks all trying to solve common problems. But the federal government doesn't have the tools to do this alone. We need the innovation ecosystem. We need startups. We need founders. We need investors engaged with us so we can try to look at the larger framing of these national security risks and how we collaboratively work together to tackle them. One of the biggest changes underway at CISA for us is how we're becoming more operationally focused. Cybersecurity is also often, in particular in the federal space, been focused around compliance exercises, paperwork, annual assessments, checking the box, whether it's for commander's readiness or checking the box for the ability to achieve a certification that's going to allow you to enter a market space. That model is wholly insufficient for the types of threats that we face today. So we're focused on measurable risk reduction and operational outcomes. And again, how do we pivot to focusing on critical infrastructure availability during a cyber attack? How can those hospitals continue to treat their patients? How can water continue to provide essential services? How can we look at the critical infrastructure interdependencies that exist? In particular in this area, as we've looked at things like data center build-outs over the last couple of years, that comes with the critical energy dependence. It comes with the critical water sector dependence. It comes with the critical telecommunications infrastructure dependence. Being able to understand the interconnected and cascading nature of those threats becomes critically important to us. And being able to recover those essential services fast enough, assuming that it doesn't matter if it's a natural disaster or a man-made adversarial moment, we're going to have disruptions. We've seen that over the last couple of months and the last 6 months. We've seen the Cloudflare outage. We've seen a Verizon outage. We saw a smaller AT&T outage in neighboring West Virginia. All of those things are just because of IT problems. That isn't even because of our adversarial action that takes place. But pause for a minute and just don't think about the technological impact associated with that. Think about the human impact that was associated with it. And it probably affected many of you. Me having to try to go back and forth with an employee whose work phone was working but their personal phone wasn't, and they forgot that the bright yellow cars in front of the airport would take them wherever they needed to go, that they didn't have to wait to be able to call an Uber because their personal phone was down. Being able to communicate with our kids, to be able to coordinate pickup, being able to engage in payment activity for people that decided not to carry cards anymore because they were using tap to pay. These are the kind of critical dependencies that are just enough of a disruption where it starts to build towards reduced confidence in the overall ecosystem. So when we think about some of our CISA programs that are important to us, we start to think about things like secure by design and some of the long-term changes that we're trying to get onto. Getting out of that model that we see as a legacy one. And again, I know I'm preaching to the choir in this room, getting away from that shipping product quickly, layering on our security later, or shipping the product quickly and assuming that a customer environment is going to have the right sort of security technologies in place. They're going to be able to mitigate potential risk, but thinking about the overall security problem holistically. The federal government dynamic there is changing. I think the market dynamic there is changing. And we start to look at these stronger controls that need to be built in from the beginning, from secure default configurations to stronger identity controls. How are we using these technologies to reduce our attack surface? And how do we have secure update mechanisms? Or how do we even just start to use some of the open source things that are out there and available as standards, like Open EOX, so that we can easily tell consumers when they've got end of life and end of service products that need to be updated and replaced. At CISA, we want to be able to use our convening power to help drive that shift and to help have those conversations collaboratively. And I think that's something that this audience in particular is going to be able to recognize, as this creates an enormous opportunity for startups and for companies that are on the investment track as we continue to go through that. And I do not envy any of you. If I never have to go through another due diligence call again, it'll only be too soon. So I'll stick to my schmucky government job for now, even if it means I don't get paid for 75 days at a time. You all don't have the same constraints that we do, though. And I know that engaging with groups like this are our opportunity to be able to inject speed into the mission in a way that we can't otherwise do. The federal government is just terrible when it comes to pretending like we can do innovation well. And at best, at times we engage in innovation tourism, where we decide to go out and go do a swing through a hub of companies that are maybe doing things that look like they're innovative. And then we give you 6 to 12 months of promises of, if you just come in and do this one presentation more and update this slide deck a little bit differently and pursue this government certification program, and that's going to be your magic unlock to be able to do business with the federal government. We're trying to change that and flip it on its head right now with our industry engagement platform and the types of work that we're doing at CISA. Not just to be able to do business with CISA, because we have a wider .gov protection mission. So for us, it's about being able to engage with technology providers and be able to engage in the solution space to identify things that aren't just going to work for securing a single agency, but things that are going to work federal government-wide that we can make available. Things that are going to work to make available for purchase for our state, local, tribal, territorial partners to be able to go through us as a partnership program. The types of things that we're trying to provide as free services right now as we look in the engagement and the outreach and the lead up to things like FIFA and the World Cup happening in just a couple of weeks, all of our America 250 events, the prep for LA 28 with the Olympics, and all of the other major mass events that we have, providing those types of free services to critical infrastructure providers, what we maybe not even think of as critical infrastructure providers. We're in a host city and the stadium doesn't have anything that goes wrong with it, great. We're in the host city, though, and the train's shut down, and the telecommunications is unavailable, and people can't call their Ubers, and they can't figure out how to get back to their hotel, and they can't find their family member who's separated from them in a crowd, and they can't get access to their hotel because the hotel's experienced a cyber attack, or local hospitals are going to be down, or the airport is not available. That's going to create a societal panic moment, not just for us, but for the millions of visitors that we're anticipating, attending along with us as we host these large world events. So as we continue to do that, we are going to have to look to technology that's going to be able to enable our workforce in a significant way, to be able to faster analyze telemetry, identify those anomalies, correlate the threat activity, prioritize the remediation, and automate those defensive workflows, and support some of the real-time operational decision-making that needs to happen on a day-to-day basis. Integrating those into real-world defensive operations faster is a key to our partnerships as we continue to work with frontier model lab companies, as we continue to look into the innovation ecosystem, as we continue to sort of identify what is it that we can do to best buy down, again, that systemic risk. We start to look at the concentration risk associated with our technology ecosystem. We do need to be able to take a hard look at things like cloud concentration, identity concentration, the telecommunications concentration, and how do we begin to buy down some of that risk that's associated. When we have a small number of providers that are underpinning a significant portion of our overall portfolios, that means that we've got a cascading consequences event that is going to lead to reduced national resilience. And that resilience has to become a part of architectural decisions, not just the cybersecurity decisions. We need that segmentation, redundancy, that recovery planning, and the operational continuity strategies in a way that is much less sexy and we used to talk about as business continuity and disaster recovery or a continuity of operations planning. That needs to become really cool again. Not just to be the jerk sitting in the side of the side of the room going, yeah, but what if this goes wrong? We have to be able to support those players and elevate them, not just as a prevention measure, but because our sophisticated adversaries will get in and they will continue to target us. Right now, we're continuing to make these pivots to reduce that operational complexity and increase our visibility and accelerate the recovery, in particular with operational technology and industrial control systems. We've had a lot of concentration on IT systems for a long time. These OT systems are the ones that have kind of gotten the short end of the stick. And these are the ones that are underpinning all the things that we count upon most as we sort of move through our day-to-day life. And that's what makes our partnerships so exceedingly important. We start to look at the conditions that we set within the United States. The good news is that we have the greatest innovation ecosystem in the world. We still have the best entrepreneurs, we have the best engineers, the best capital markets, and the best ability to be able to rapidly innovate to solve for these problems. Just our challenge now is speed, and our challenge is safety and adoption. We have to move faster, we have to build faster, we have to adapt faster, and we have to operationalize innovation faster than our adversaries to be able to meet the challenges of the day that are in front of us. When we start to look at our industrial control systems in particular, this is going to be a significant challenge for us. Our adversaries are pre-positioning and moving to take advantage of sort of the soft underbelly of things that are open and available. That's what we've seen with the Iranians, with the tactics that they've been using over the last couple of months in particular has been how do they get after the soft underbelly of items that are accessible on the internet, things that are using default security parameters, things that aren't getting updated, things that are beyond end of life and end of service. Those are challenges that we're going to have to collaboratively be able to meet together as we start to look at overall resilience. I'm going to pause there because I think we're going to take a couple of questions. If y'all have some questions, is that still correct? Okay. But if nobody has any questions, I'm just going to keep rambling about critical infrastructure, and you're never going to get me off the stage. Yes, sir.
Because that's a great first shot across the bow, but really, if that's all there's going to be, we'll still have the same problem 5 years from now.
Yeah, so we are not the critical element involved in the router waivers. I'm probably using the wrong terminology that was used in the order. But the waiver process that's associated with the FCC is not necessarily something that CISA is front and center on. We've got a much broader set of sort of supply chain risk and threat items that we're looking at. I think at the end of the day, there's a push and a pull here. There's how are we going to make sure that we have an American ecosystem of technology providers and manufacturers that we can count on and that we can rely on. And we do see nation-state adversaries taking advantage of the manufacturing process overseas. I mean, we've got it hard, cold evidence of manufacturing that is occurring overseas and injects that we see within the supply chain ecosystem where they're taking advantage of our overseas manufacturing in order to be able to insert both hardware and software vulnerabilities into our greater ecosystem. And we see a tremendous amount of white labeling still of Chinese-made devices in particular that'll get a ban by name and then flip over to be white labeled under a different device name. So I think there's a couple of different elements that are leading to that determination. In addition to just being honest with you, just real shoddy security work that goes into some of them. If we look back at like the Huawei ban a couple of years ago, some of the initial analysis that went into the reasoning behind banning Huawei wasn't just China bad, U.S. good, buy our stuff, because we don't really actually make all that much within the ecosystem in that space. A lot of it was looking at just the incredibly shoddy security processes that they have that go into these things. I mean, it's just, forget that it's cheaper and forget that it's state-sponsored and everything else. It's just shit product. Like, it's just terrible. So I think, anyways, you let me ramble a little bit. But it's there's a lot of different mechanisms that are there. Both DHS and DOW right now are looking at what's that waiver process going to look like. Because what we don't want to have happen, while we do want to, again, encourage American manufacturing, while we do want to encourage the use of secure products, what we don't want to see happen is we don't want to see a lot of legacy products continuing to hang on and stay out there and introducing a lot of vulnerability and risk because they're beyond end of life, beyond end of service, not getting security updates at all, and then they introduce a new security vulnerability within the space.
And if you have a question, I'll run the mic over to you.
Hi, Nick. Thanks for the comments. I just wanted to ask you a question about how CISA is collaborating with other federal agencies like NERC and FERC with respect to energy infrastructure that is now getting located at data centers. Largely, data centers have avoided coming under NERC and FERC regulations. So what is your view on the threat activity and also how you're collaborating with these agencies?
You mean there's other agencies you want to work with other than CISA?
Yeah.
I mean, forget those guys. So NERC and FERC are more on the regulatory side. So I'll be honest with you. CISA does not do a lot of work on the regulatory side. We try to very intentionally make a distinction between if you're working with us and you're a member of this ecosystem, I don't want you to worry that we're going to be taking a bunch of information and handing it over to regulators, and here comes regulatory action and an investigation and a fine and everything else. Whether something bad has happened or not, we just want you to be able to talk to us and be able to report to us. But the larger question that I think you're asking is really about energy system resilience surrounding key elements of critical infrastructure like data centers. If you look at the critical infrastructure sectors and how they're designated, it goes back to older presidential directives. And the way that it's segmented doesn't call out something like data centers. So does it fall within the comm sector? Does it fall within the IT sector? It's the same sort of debate about space-based systems that are out there as well. We continue to collaborate with bringing data center providers further into the fold on these conversations. But on the energy sector side, we have a couple of very specific initiatives. In addition to the CI Fortify that I mentioned a few minutes ago, we've got a couple of others, like our Homeland Defense Working Group that we've kicked off recently, brings together energy, EPA, DOW, our sector risk management agency partners, the FBI, NSA, Cyber Command, us. There's quite a few that are all thrown in there together just to be able to look at the analysis that we did for the purposes of public health and safety, continuity of the economy, national security, and defense critical infrastructure. What do we think are the most systemically important entities that we need to have some very deliberate one-on-one conversations with, and how do we develop joint work plans with them? We want to be able to develop those joint work plans with these entities because after we do the analysis on what do we think is important for those purposes, then we went back in the last 5 or 6 years of subcompartmented intelligence holdings that we have, and then we looked at where's the adversary actually pre-positioning. Where does the intel tell us that the adversary is spending their time because they get a vote? So blue space view, what's important to us, red space view, what's important to them, what's that overlap in a very simple way of couching it here. That's led us to joint work plans with those entities. And it's going to look a little bit different for each one. If we have somebody who's a very large telecommunications provider, for example, their entire joint work plan with them might just be increased liability protection because they need to know that in a bad day, if we ask them to take action, we ask them to start sinkholing IPs, or we ask them to prioritize restoration activity to a certain group of customers over another, they need to know they're not going to get sued if they're doing that at the behest of the government. That might be the end of the joint work plan with them. But if I've got somebody who's like an Omaha Public Power District over here, and they're a small municipal-owned utility that happens to provide energy to people like Offutt Air Force Base and Nuclear Command and Control for U.S. Strategic Command, probably going to need to give them some dollars because the ratepayers in Omaha shouldn't necessarily have to bear uniquely the cost of national security and the fact that Nuclear Command and Control sits in their backyard. So how we work with the energy entities is primarily through the Department of Energy itself rather than through NERC and FERC. But a lot of our technical analysis work we do certainly provide over to inform the regulatory rulemaking process. We just try to keep a bright line if we can between regulator and CISA because I just don't want people to think of CISA as a regulator. And things like CERCIA rulemaking and incident reporting and everything else over the next year is already going to lead us to a weird enough spot there where people may start to look at us that way, and we're just trying to keep that distinction pretty clear.
Nick, thank you for your comment. My first question is about there are attacks enabled by Gen AI, such as Anthropic, Mythos. And I would like to know CISA, how CISA look at the threat that's coming, not just immediately, but 2-3 years down the road, enabled by such capability. Second is, could you share with us the top 3 steps actions you have taken so far? And the third is, if you look at your solution portfolio, what are missing? So we can maybe find startups, invest in them, could fit into the solution portfolio. That's the first question. The second question is, you mentioned Huawei, et cetera, right? So talk about supply chain security. Would like to have your view on microelectronics and AI agent. What are you going to do in those areas? Thank you.
That was not 1 and 2 questions. That was like 3 questions in one that then led to a second question with a subpart C1. I'm not going to remember half of that, but I'm going to try. So I think when we look at overall AI-enabled risk and threat, like everybody's been talking about Anthropic and everybody's been talking about Mythos. There are other models coming that everybody knows about, and importantly, our adversaries also have models that'll be coming in short order. So for us, the real focus has been, this is just going to, just to be completely honest, and I don't mean to like really overly simplify it, this is just going to exacerbate a problem that already existed. Like, yes, maybe there is a product suite over here that did not know that they had a type of vulnerability. Finding vulnerabilities has not been the problem for us. The scale and speed at which we can find vulnerabilities and then remediate them is a problem for us. Finding the vulnerabilities and knowing that vulnerabilities were there is not the problem. It's the inherent debt that we have, either through tech debt or through people not having a rigorous update cycle, or for people not maintaining their infrastructure, or for people deciding to make product security decisions and trade-offs for a variety of reasons that have led us to sort of being in a bad defensive posture. So I think it's going to accelerate that for us. So even before Mythos came to be and before it became the only thing that we got to talk about for the entire month of April, it was already something that we were discussing. We were seeing, just with the regular AI model availability within the space, we were starting to see the weaponization and exploit window shorten significantly. So when we see CVEs that are disclosed, vulnerabilities that are disclosed, and then we actually see them being exploited in the wild, CISA will list them in the KEV, in the Known Exploited Vulnerabilities database. We were starting to see the time to exploit after we place something in the KEV. The old binding operational directives, just for federal departments and agencies, used to say, I think it was either 10 or 14 days. It was put in the KEV, you've got 10 or 14 days to be able to go out and remediate this thing because bad people are doing bad things. We were already looking, before Mythos came to be part of the conversation, we were already looking at, do we need to shrink that down to 48 hours? And saying if you exceed 48 hours, are we going to have mandatory hunt guidance on our networks to say, if you've exceeded 48 hours, you just have to assume the adversary's probably already compromised you. Because again, just the speed to CVE is published, a patch is provided, the reverse engineering has happened, and then it's weaponized, and we actually see the exploit is shrinking so significantly. So we're looking at a sort of a broader approach right now to updates to our coordinated vulnerability disclosure process, updates to how we work with the community collaboratively to be able to take care of that. Because I'm going to tell you, am I worried about the systemically important companies that we all think about within the tech ecosystem and having very broad-based availability of vulnerabilities out there that can be exploited? Yes. I'm very worried about the open source community and where we're going to look there. There's that old XKCD cartoon of everything built up on this teeny tiny little peg down here at the bottom that's supporting it all, and it points to the peg and says, this little peg is maintained by Greg in Kansas in his basement as a hobby project for the last 20 years. Greg's not going to have the time to remediate all these things that are going to come flying at him, and we're running these things as hobby projects. But because they're good and they work and people like them, they get baked into a lot of these products that are getting shipped. So I think that's going to be a more extended problem for us. But we're looking at how do we bring in the ecosystem to both be able to look at the security and vulnerability risk associated with these models that we'll see, but also how do we test AI safety deployment? How do we come up with good business recommendations associated with it for people to consider as they look at AI adoption within the federal ecosystem and elsewhere? Now, when we look at the types of solutions and the types of gaps that we're looking for, in particular, those that are focused on being able to help automate that remediation cycle, and the ones that are focused on operational technology, I think are critically important. We just don't have the availability within our operational technology community, within our control system community, to be able to remediate the types of vulnerabilities that we're going to see. And it is, again, it is going to create a serious cascading critical infrastructure failure risk across the board. So we're talking about data center security and energy availability. If we don't have power, nobody's going to care about the data center, because the data center is not going to have power either. If we don't have water, we're not going to be able to run the chillers. If we can't run the chillers, then we're not going to be able to run the equipment, because it's going to overheat, and that's going to create a physical security problem for us. All of the different elements that go in there are going to be exceedingly important to us, and that's where we're trying to look at service availability and tool availability for how can we provide these things that are going to be available for the state and local community to consume on a free basis from CISA, and how can the critical infrastructure community consume them. All of that's going to have to be a consortium-based approach. We're not going to be able to do it on our own. And I've got like 10 seconds left, so I think that's as far as I'm going to be able to get in your question. But the AI risk and challenge is going to be a significant one for us, and this is why I think we see such a significant level of involvement right now from the White House and the National Cyber Director, continuing to lead these groups that we're pulling together, from our interagency partners pulling this together. The Secretary of the Treasury does not get involved very lightly in sort of issues of the day, and he has jumped in with both feet on this issue, as has our Secretary, Secretary Mullen. So I think we're going to continue to see a level of significant involvement here, and I think we're going to see a level of presidential engagement and presidential action probably in the coming weeks on all of this. So thank you all. We got one more. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Nick, very much for your comments. As AI systems evolve from human-assisted tools to increasingly autonomous agents interacting with critical infrastructure, you talked about some of the challenges, like agents not doing what we want them to do. It means a data center that has no water for cooling or no energy. Where do you believe the biggest governance and security gaps exist? And do you think, we see a lot of companies looking at observability. Do you think observability is enough, or do we need to look at runtime control and enforcement?
Yeah, I don't think that that's enough. I think it's a start, but I don't think that it's enough. And again, I think we're continuing to downplay the level of significance that these environments hold when we start to look at the potential risk and threat. So no, I think it's a good start, but I don't think that it's enough. I think we're going to continue to invest in a significant way on both severability, isolation, recoverability, and our ability to be able to smartly visualize and understand that risk. And I think in the near term, as that becomes harder and harder, I think we're going to continue to see people wanting to build up their own independent supporting infrastructure to be able to provide support, just because they don't feel like they're going to be able to rely on others. I think it's going to result in a lot of uneasy questions. So, all right, well, thank you all again for having me. I really appreciate it, and hope you all have a great rest of the day here. Thanks so much.
Just stay out here for 1 second. Thank you. So before he goes, I just want to say probably one of the most challenging times in my personal career is 2008. The company I was at was had done 47 acquisitions, and we ended up divesting over 18 different business units. And one of the challenges around that was we got put into discontinued operations. And when you get put into discontinued operations, one of the things they do is they take away your bonus, they take away your equity, they take away your access to the employee stock purchase program. It was the most challenging leadership moment for me when my employees were not getting access to the benefits, let alone getting paid. And so one of the things I want to do is just thank you. I got advice at the time is tie yourself to the mast, and I really appreciate the change that you're managing that organization through, the incredible stress that it must be put on your organization, this kind of what's happening from a budgetary perspective. One more round of applause, of appreciation of what the organization. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
I really do.